before we get into the actual tips, I'm just going to introduce myself just a little bit for those of you who don't know me. I promise I won't be super long-winded in talking about myself, but I went to law school with a young family, had a lot to balance and juggle, and I had to work to support my family during law school. And so it was an awesome time. I loved law school. Totally loved it, but I had to innovate in some ways to make my law school experience uh, as positive as it was. So I created kind of a different form of study groups, and I blogged about that before. You can check that out. If you're still in law school, I know we have a few non-bar preppers or non-active bar preppers that are joining us today. I've also that's kind of how the audio outlines came about, just so I could balance my life and school and work. Walking to the park, I'd listen to audio outlines. I'm not going to talk a ton about audio outlines because anybody who knows anything about Crushendo knows that's our jam, like audio outlines, mnemonics, stuff like that. And that's not this session isn't for selling you on Crushendo. It's giving you just awesome tips to help you out, regardless of whether or not you're a Crushendo audio user. Anyway, that's a little about me during law school. I studied for the bar, often hiking to this spot, Squaw Peak in Utah, just listening to audio. That's me with my two sons there. They found a snake as we were hiking. They're a lot of fun. Love those kids. After I graduated from law school, I went and worked as an assistant attorney general in American Samoa. Had phenomenal, unique experiences there, and absolutely loved the culture, the land, the people. Just fantastic. It's so cool, the doors that can open once you pass the bar exam. So I hope you keep in mind, what you're working toward. What are your goals? Maybe some of you go work on an island in the middle of the Pacific. You could, and work for the Attorney General's office. There's so many possibilities once you get that bar exam under your belt. So look forward to that. And then after I got back from working in American Samoa, I started Crushendo in 2017. I've been doing it full-time for most of the time since then. I did work part-time for BYU Law School, my alma mater, up until a couple years back, which was a great experience too. Anyway, that is my introduction about me. Only took 3 minutes. Phew. Sometimes I get more long-winded than I realize, but that's about how much time I wanted to spend on this. So let's dive right into our big meaty tips. I'm going to blow through these and then I'll look at the chat and we'll just tackle questions. I might jump back to the tips that I'm talking about here as I go slide by slide as we look at your questions if you have questions about the specific tips. So this is an interesting one. How do you do a ton of MBE questions really quickly? So ideally, you're not going to run out of time on the MBE. Ideally, you're practicing MBE questions at an accelerated pace, so you actually have a little extra time on exam day to review answers, go to the bathroom, etc. But the ideal doesn't always play out, and it's good to have backup plans. Now, usually the backup plan on the MBE for people is, well, if I run out of time, I just got to mark something, and they'll just go through randomly checking boxes. Okay, I'm just going to go straight A's all the way down, straight B's, straight C's, straight D's, or some random pattern, make some kind of design. That's better than nothing. Obviously, a blank won't get you the possibility of points. Obviously, if you just choose something randomly, you have, statistically a 25% chance of getting that question right. Not very high, but better than zero. Well, what is a better approach than that? The better approach is very, very simple. You don't have time, if you have 5 minutes to do 10 questions, to read the entire body of the question. So, option number one, you just read the answer choices and you isolate the law parts of the answer choices, which should stand alone, independent, and should be true in all cases, in all places. Our rule statements should not be broken. And there are going to be rule statements in the vast majority of your answer choices. So go through the rule, go through the answer choices, look at the rules, and just eliminate the ones that are broken. Some questions you might be able to eliminate 3. But usually it's 1 or 2. But even then, you're getting your odds up to either 33.3%, right, or 50% on that question just by eliminating the questions with broken law, the question choices, sorry. And then the other option, this is if you have a little bit more time, It doesn't take that much more time though, so I actually strongly recommend the second choice. And as with all of these tips I'm going to talk about today, these test strategies, you want to practice them, you want to try them out for yourself. They may or may not work for you, uh, but I've seen this work. This is a great approach. It's worth your experimentation, and that's how I'm going to be with all my tips. These are not like uh, undeniable truths of what everybody must do on the exam. These are ideas and options to experiment, see if they work for you. So here's my invitation for experimentation here. The second choice is you read the call of the question and the answer choices. That just gives you a little bit more context so you know uh, a little bit more of what's going on. You don't know all the facts, but you can have an idea of where things should be going, and you can see if there's a broken logic chain between the call of the question and the answer option. So let me give you some examples to bring this hopefully to life. So let's say you have a question and you don't have time to read the body of the question or even the call of the question, but you have these four answer options. So the first one, no, because the federal rules prohibit hearsay in grand jury proceedings. Now, I don't even need to look at the no because or yes. Well, I may need to look at the no or yes once I have context of the question, but right now, all I'm focusing on is just the rule statements presented in these answer options. So if I isolate it in this one, it would be the federal rules prohibit hearsay in grand jury proceedings. I just have to ask myself, is that true or is that false? So think about it for a second. The answer in this is false. The federal rules of evidence typically don't apply in grand jury proceedings, right? And so they're not going to prohibit hearsay in grand jury proceedings. Let's look at this next no down at the bottom here. It says no because, and here's the rule we're isolating, prior bad acts cannot be used for any purpose that implies he's guilty of the crime charged. Now, there are some red flags in that rule statement because it says for any purpose. It seems pretty absolute, seems very strong. So even if I don't know the law really well, there might be a little bit of a red flag that would turn me away from this option. But if I know the law well, I can go categorically, is this true or is this false? Is it true that prior bad acts cannot be used for any purpose that implies he's guilty of the crime charged? Can prior bad acts be used for purposes that ultimately imply guilt? And sure, they can. They just can't be used to paint a particular negative character or negative character trait and therefore imply that they're guilty of doing something in this case. But it could be used to show something like motive. It could be something to show knowledge, identity, right? Planning, a lack of accident, and really any other purpose other than that forbidden character evidence purpose. But it ultimately can get you to the same place of guilt. So I would know, oh no, that one I'm going to nix that. So 2 down, 2 to go. And obviously you're going to be doing this a lot faster than I'm doing it, just out loud because I have to talk through everything. But yes, because the evidence lacks probative value. Now, this doesn't really give me a rule statement. It's just describing a conclusion based on the facts. So I don't really have something on there, so I'm going to breeze past that for now. Though I may make mental note that when evidence lacks probative value, it can impact things. Okay, yes, because prejudicial risks substantially outweigh probative value. Again, that's a conclusion, so I don't really have much to go on here. So if I'm not looking at the call of the question and I'm just going on my answer options, I'm going to go for yes because this or yes because that. But both of those options, I don't really know. But I've got my odds up to 50% here on this question just by eliminating the false rule statement that federal rules prohibit hearsay in grand jury proceedings and the false rule statement that prior bad acts cannot be used for any purpose that implies he's guilty of the crime charged. Now, let's say we read the call of the question. That's going to give us some more context. Let's see if we can narrow things down even further or with even more confidence. So this is if we're taking the second approach, which I would recommend. Call the question, answer options. If you're short on time, and practice this. So I know you're doing tons of MBE questions. Hopefully, over the course of your bar prep, more than 1,000, more than 1,500, 2,000, plus. I mean, that's a good goal. But as you're doing these MBEs, just don't do them all the normal way. Take some time where you stretch yourself with one of these techniques and you say, look, today I'm going to do one of my 10 question quizzes. I'm going to do it in 3 minutes and I'm going to try this approach, or I'm going to do it in 5 minutes and see. Just take a goal, make a goal, see how you can do and how fast you can do MBE questions, and see how you score on it. So if you're doing the call to question and read the answer option approach, what's that going to look like? Well, the end of the call to question in this one is the evidence admissible at trial? Okay, that's good. It gives us context. We're talking about trial and we're talking about, is it admissible? Not is it not admissible, but is it admissible? So how does that help us? Well, if we looked at that first, no, because the federal rules prohibit hearsay in grand jury proceedings. Well, even if I don't even know the rule, I know this doesn't mesh logically because we're talking about at trial. So why do I care about a rule for grand jury proceedings? I can nix that one, even if I don't know the rule. If I go back to the no, because prior bad acts cannot be used for any purpose that implies guilt in this case, knowing the rule can help. I'm not really being benefited by the call to question in that one, but it's not going to help in every single question, obviously. Every question option is what I mean to say. Now, if we look at the yes becauses, the context is pivotal. Yes, because the evidence lacks probative value. All right. Let's think logically here. Is the evidence admissible at trial? Yes, it's admissible because it's not relevant. That's what it's saying there, right? And so we have a broken logic chain. It's true that evidence probative value matters, but it matters in a way opposite to what this logic chain is suggesting. So we know that's not a good answer. Is the evidence admissible at trial? Yes, because prejudicial risks outweigh probative value. So this is just a goofy question I just made up. That one is also going to be broken. I just wanted to highlight another example of a broken logic chain. None of these answers are good answers. You'd nix them all because prejudicial risks outweighing probative value isn't going to enhance admissibility. It's going to put it at risk because of Rule 403, right? It's going to give the judge discretion. The judge may keep out of court anything where prejudicial risks substantially outweigh probative value. And so that's another thing too. Like if we're just thinking the rule statement, prejudicial risks outweighing probative value, that can matter, but for 403 purposes anyway, it would be substantially outweigh in the rule. Anyway, so we would nix all of these options and there would hopefully be another option that we choose and we'd be good to go. So there is potential to get with confidence a question correct without ever reading the facts pattern. It's crazy, but it's true. So that's that on that first tip. Again, feel free to put questions in the comment box there, and I'll peek at those at the end and see if we can address them. Okay, this is another more advanced tip, how to streamline essays when you're running out of time. We're not going to talk about UROC, IRAC, or CRAC. Obviously, you're using those basic structures generally. But what do you do when you're out of time and you can't do, separate rule paragraphs for every element? Can't do separate application paragraphs for every element or operating on the facts if you're using a UROC structure. How can you get through the meat of an answer and score as many points as possible without doing the normal structure? I get the normal structure is great. Like practice that. You're not going to practice just to do this other way I'm going to show you. This is just your backup plan, right? And so what I'm going to call this is the super beefy conclusion. And what's special about this conclusion is it's got key facts interwoven in it. It's got key law interwoven in it. And it answers the question that's being posed in the prompt. So say the question is something along the lines, is Bob liable for negligence in this case? Well, in one sentence, whoops, I need to just jump back there, I accidentally clicked. In one sentence, I can answer this whole question in a way that can score me substantial points It's not ideal, but if you're really short on time, you could get away with this. So, and again, just like all test strategies, you want to practice this. You want to see how it works for you. See if this is a good solution to those low time situations for you. Um, so here's this example. Bob is not liable for negligence because though he breached his duty of care to act as a reasonably prudent person in like circumstances, when he blew a red light, okay, key fact, he blew a red light. Okay, that's why he breached it. You're also telling me about duty, duty of care, to act as a reasonably prudent person. You're giving me key rule there. And was the but-for cause of Frank's injuries. Okay, giving me some rule for negligence. There must be a but-for cause. That's what I'm saying. If he had stopped, Frank would not have been harmed. Sorry, there's a little table there. If he had stopped, Frank would not have been harmed. That is more key facts applied to that rule. That shows why we're concluding he wasn't a but-for cause. Parentheticals can be extremely helpful in a pinch like this, where you can make a quick commentary about the key facts, or as we'll see in the next parenthetical, a quick commentary on the laws that apply. So he's not liable for negligence because though he breached his duty, blah, 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 Bob was not the proximate cause of the harm. It was not reasonably foreseeable. The failure to stop would cause an onlooker. And here's a little bit of injected law to show the grader. I know what I'm talking about. An intervening superseding cause, right? This is a third party committing a crime, right? That is typically your slam dunk intervening superseding cause, right? That would cut off proximate cause, cut off your liability, right? To shoot at Bob's car and hit Frank on accident, right? Just mad that this car blew through. So this is my super beefy conclusion example. I'm highlighting key facts. I'm highlighting the key pivotal laws. I'm using parentheticals to bring it to life. So I'm telling some of the story, and I'm also showing the grader I know what I'm talking about. And so this super beefy conclusion, not an ideal IRAC crack situation, but could score you really good points still in a pinch. Now, if you're even in more of a pinch, this could actually be streamlined a little bit further. And it brings me to my next point of how to streamline essays when you're running out of time. So many essays have issues where they hinge on an element test, right? Or they hinge on a defense being applicable. Now, if it's an element test, obviously, if it comes out in the affirmative that every element is met, therefore there is liability, then you have to hit every element. You can't get around that. But if not every element is met, then obviously there is no liability. And you can focus on the points that flip the switch to the negative without having to mention all the positives. Remember, in the last example for this paragraph, we said, though there's duty and there's breach and actual cause, blah, blah, blah. The though doesn't pivot anything. It just is a little bit of a flex to show the grader that I know my stuff, that I know that there's these other aspects of negligence, and I know how they play out. But ultimately here, it's hinging on the fact that there's no proximate cause. And so in a pinch, if I have even less time and something turns in the negative, focus on the thing that flips the switch. So in this case, I could just say, Bob is not liable for negligence because Bob was not the proximate cause of harm. It was not reasonably foreseeable the failure to stop would cause an onlooker an intervening super cause to shoot at Bob's car and hit Frank. You can do the same thing if there's a clutch defense that applies. You could say, even if there was a contract in this case, it would not, so-and-so would not be liable for breach because duress, statute of frauds, insert the defenses that may apply. And so to sum this up again, in a pinch, we can focus on the points that are most pivotal. We don't have to hit every element. that and how every element plays out if there is a element or a couple elements that come out very clearly in the direction that would flip the switch toward the negative. So really cool technique, good to practice. If you're running out of time, that's great because you scored the most points for those switch flippers. If you look through the NCB grading sheets, it's very clear they focus on the switch flippers. You can still talk about the other things. The other things are good and they're relevant, but they're not as critical as the pivotal things. Okay, moving on to my next tip. What if you draw a blank? Or, what do you do when you don't know the law tested on an essay? This is like one of the number one things people have anxiety and, just shaking their boots about. Like, oh man, what if I just don't know anything for a question that I'm asked on the exam? Now, I have been in this situation. It happened to me on a secure transactions question when I was actually taking the exam. It was brutal. I didn't really know how to prioritize between a purchase money security interest in property and purchase money security interest in a fixture on that property, which would take priority. And so I had to make an educated guess. But I was very candid about how I made the guess, and I'm going to explain why. So I want you to think about what it means to be a good attorney and how do good attorneys handle questions that push the boundaries of his or her knowledge, right? How do they do that, right? They talk general principles, they show their competence with their clients. They say, here's what I know, here are some things that I'm concerned about here. Um, and then there's candor. Like here are things that I'm going to look into. I'm not sure about the specific law as to that part of your case. I'm going to have to look into that. I don't know which way that's going to go. Now, obviously, you don't have the benefit on the exam of telling the grader like, hey, just I'm gonna go look that up and I'll come back later and give you the answer in a week, right? You can't do that. But candor and honesty still is valuable and going to have a good impression on your attorney grader because attorney graders know what it means to be a good attorney. And so, what you could say is something along the lines of, here, first off, you always know something, right? It's never, oh, I don't know anything for this question. Stop yourself. It's an emotional response. That's illogical. You always know law that's relevant. For example, say you're doing a contracts question and you don't know the nuances of the statute of frauds and you think it applies in this case and you're not sure what to do with it, right? You still may know things like, well, if it's a good contract, then UCC, Article 2 is going to apply, right? And so you could inject that and say, the way the law is going to play out for this is going to be based on UCC Article 2, which says, if you know the law, that's great. If you don't, then you can say, I'm not sure exactly what it says for this type of situation. However, inject some public policy considerations, inject some general principles of law that you are familiar with in other areas of the law. There's so much overlap in the law. The specifics sometimes can be different, or most of the time they're different when you jump from, one place to another in the law, but there's overlap in the principles of secure transactions and property, overlap in the principles of criminal law and constitutional law. There's so much overlap in just the general principles at play, which are, justice, equality, fairness, all those things. And so you can always look at any question through the lens of justice, fairness, and you can be candid if you hit the wall of your knowledge, and then it's better than BSing. If you BS and you get it right, like that's great, but that's not likely. And if you get it wrong, it makes you look really, really bad. And so it's better to just hedge your bets and say things like, it's likely that the court would consider things like this. Though I don't know the exact rule for this particular principle, it's likely that the court would consider things like this, and this, and use some logic and reason. It doesn't hurt to just straight up show that you know where the gap is and how you're addressing that gap. It's better than faking and BSing in my own experience, because I used an approach like that, and I've had people I tutor use that approach, and they've done well on the exam. I did actually my best on the exam on the essays, and that included that one essay that I had that big blank on. So use what you know, express what the limit of your knowledge is, and then make educated guesses as to what principles may be at play and which way it would likely go. You could even do it, if the law for the jurisdiction does this, then it would come out this way. If the law for the jurisdiction does that, then it would come out that way. You could even do that. Okay, moving on here, because time is just running away. We're at almost halfway through. So, how to impress graders without wasting time. This is what I have personally dubbed the flex and focus. Now, I have seen so many times, especially early on, when people are practicing essays, that they just vomit law into their rule statements. They just put it in there because they know it's the same solar system of law. But generally, you don't want to put any law in your rule statement unless you use that law in your analysis. That's a general rule. So one of the things I call out people I tutor on is if I find things in their rule and I go, hey, when did you use that rule in the facts? I didn't. Okay, then why'd you put it in there? So so that's your general rule. But how do we handle this like inclination and to show off, if you will, what we know without wasting time, but still, showing our muscles. So we're basically flexing, but we're not lifting with those muscles. We're just like flashing them and showing them that, yeah, I've got this, but I'm going to lift with the most relevant ones. So flash your rule muscles, but lift with the most relevant ones. Here's a quick example. Shows you how quick this flex is. So say your rule statement has to do with what personal jurisdiction is, whether or not there is personal jurisdiction in a federal court over an individual. So here's how the rule statement could go. Personal jurisdiction in federal court over an individual in a specific case can be established in several ways. Here's my flex. Like through consent, domicile, in-state service, in-state property, or minimum related contacts with the forum. Right? There's my flex. I'm showing them I know my stuff. Dude, I've got a consent muscle. I got a domicile muscle. Got my in-state service. Got my in-state property muscle. Right? I just flashed them. But now I'm showing you the focus, and I'm going to lift with the ones that are most relevant. And here, the most relevant basis is minimum related contacts, which requires, and then I'm going to go into the law related to minimum related contacts. And so I'm going to spell that out. You notice I'm not spelling out all the law related to domicile. I don't have to tell them, domicile, a place where you live and intend to return to and live indefinitely. That's where you're domiciled. I don't have to tell them, in-state service, you got to be there voluntarily. And if you're there as an agent for a company, blah, blah, blah. I don't have to talk about how with in-state property, it's only up to the value of the property that's in state. And there's got to be some relation between that property and the case at hand. And I don't need to talk about how you consent. If you bring a case like a plaintiff, you consent to the jurisdiction there. If and the other ways that you might consent through through being in that state. So I'm not spelling any of that out. I'm just doing a quick flex to just show I've got those muscles, right? And then I'm showing them I know how to use my muscles and focus on what is most relevant. All right. When it comes to performance tests, having a strategy as to how to approach, the 15 to 20 pages of small font text you're going to get is very, very vital. This next tip, you will get this tip pretty much anywhere you go. I didn't invent this. We use a little mnemonic at Crushendo. Monkeys steal fancy rings, which is a ludicrous, silly, dumb mnemonic. but it helps me remember it. But you read the memo first, right? What is my supervising attorney asking me to do? And then you look for statutes or anything that's statute-like. It could be a regulation. It could be in a statute, obviously. But anything that's statute-like that will give you the overall rule that's going to be at play. And then you're going to look at the facts, and you're going to keep those facts. You're going to work through those facts with that statute in mind. So that statute may list elements, may list factors, may list defenses. That regulation, if there's not a statute. If there is no statute or regulation, what do you do? Well, you can look at, skim through the cases to try to find the court's general rule statement. That will be a statute-like or regulation-like as you can get in those kind of situations. It's rare, but if it happens, that's what you do. Try to isolate, the rule paragraph, just like you did when you were in law school and, briefing cases. But yeah, you look at the facts with those statutes in mind, and then you're going to be left with some questions. Statutes have ambiguities. Statutes don't define all their terms. Statutes don't spell out every exception necessarily. And so then you're going to use the rest of the library to look through case law. Primarily, that's usually where you get it, to look for nuances and answers to those specific questions. So like when the statute says there's got to be malice aforethought, what does that mean? Okay, so here's a case that defines statute malice aforethought. Perfect, cool. I'm going to use that. So you're just scouring for those nuggets. You don't need everything from the library. You're just skimming to try to find those key terms that are part of that statute to help bring it to life, or facts that are similar to your fact pattern that can help you understand and analyze by analogy and distinguishing how the case would play out. So read the memo. What exactly am I being asked to do? Is it an email? Am I writing my own memo where I'm being objective, saying what's likely or not likely? Am I writing a brief with persuasive intent that's going to have a different type of language? Okay, so I'm reading the memo. I'm getting basically the call to question from the memo. Then I'm looking for the statute or anything statute-like. Then I'm looking to the facts, keeping that basic law in mind. And then I'm looking for the rest of the library for those nuances of the law that will bring my analysis to life and give me a far stronger answer. All right. Sorry, that should not be there. That was just, sorry, I just made this morning. We already did that. Why is it going in a circle? Actually, I'm not sure what's going on. I'm clicking, not progressing. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. That was super weird. I was just like left clicking through and it just kept like looping through those. Anyway, I'm going to take a break from this slide for a second and peek at the chat to see what questions we have here based on what we've talked about so far. Looks like some really good comments. Just going to jump up a little bit. Okay. Some questions specific about Crushendo. We can talk about those later. Great question, UBE MEE question. Is it true that out of the 6 MEEs tested, at least 3 of the 6 tested MEEs tested must be MEE specific subjects? I have never heard of that specific rule. I've heard that any of the topics are testable and there isn't a set. But I could just be ignorant. I've never heard that. I'll look into that. I can send out a follow-up email after what I find, or you'll find something too before me, but sorry, I don't know that off the top of my head. The streamlining definitely demonstrates minimal competence, which is allegedly what we're aiming for. Okay, just some commentary there. Yep. Let's see, just wondering whether the recording. Yep, the recording will be available afterwards. Great question. Should you actually say the words "I don't know" verbatim? Could you say those? There may be better language around that. I don't think it would hurt you to say it though, as long as it's very specific to like the one thing you don't know. You don't want to accidentally over broadly inflate your ignorance to something it is not. So on the essay that I struggled with in secured transactions, I straight up said, I don't know if there is a rule that sets out whether a PMSI in real estate should have priority over a PMSI in a fixture on that real estate, but blah, blah, blah. It didn't seem to harm me. Obviously, graders are a little bit subjective. There may be a way to frame it without saying, I don't know. I'm unfamiliar seems a little bit gentler in terms of ignorance. A lack of familiarity, everybody has things they're not completely familiar with. Maybe that would have been a better way to frame it. I'm unfamiliar with, or you could just frame it in terms of possibilities. It's possible that the court would give priority to the fixture because of this, potentially, or it's possible that the court would go the other way because of insert your policy and other considerations. Okay, Margaret says she got her best score on essay, which she had to improvise. Cool. It's great to get other opinions. Good idea. If you have professors that grade exams, if you know people who are graders, ask them how they would respond. As with all tips and tricks and strategies, there are limitations to them. They're not, set in stone. Yeah, you're just rolling the dice if you make up a rule. They want, I don't know. You maybe can get people in different camps. I'm just speaking from my experience, Martha. It's a good point. If you don't feel comfortable with it, no pressure. Okay, tips on how to use bold, underline, cap letters, breaks in text when answering essays. I never use bold or underline. I definitely use capitals, like in sentence, case, context, and, proper nouns and such like that. The one thing I do stress with presentation and formality is to use ample paragraphing, right? So if use like a separate paragraph for each part of your IRAC or crack generally, right? Like here's my issue, space. I never take the time to indent because that's just a waste of time. But I want to show we're moving to a separate section of my answer. So here's my rule, and I don't label it as rule, but it just dives right into the rule, and then pivot to the facts and analyzing the facts, and then another paragraph for conclusion. Obviously, there are times when you might need to streamline and put together your analysis. When you're running out of time, you can do one of those super beefy conclusions, like I gave an example of. All right, legislative history. How would you use that if those were in? So that's great. Depending on the ambiguity and depending on the approach by a court, whether they have more textualism or purposivism, you might be able to get more bang or less bang out of that legislative history by seeing, selectively what some people said regarding it or its intent. Legislative history is always a little bit questionable because it's not law, right? And in the one camp, right, the textualism camp, we just read the words as they're written and we use the meaning that's been defined in the law or just the common meaning of those terms in the law, rather than just selectively picking, the things that were documented. Some people that, we could quote, but legislative history could still be used. It's just, I think you need to give it ample caveats and not use it like, because they said the purpose was this, it must be. But the court could consider, that at least some legislators considered the purpose to include something like that that is not, inconsistent with how the rule could be read. So blah blah blah. When writing an MBE, would you suggest writing out the rules? Oh, I think you mean essay there from the library, or MPT maybe, and copy the question from the memo. Yeah, I think that's generally a good idea. On the MEE too, when you're doing the essays, at if you're using an IRAC structure, which I generally recommend because it's hard to know a conclusion until you go through the analysis. So just copying and pasting the issues that they give you. If you can upgrade them. I won't go into depth on that. You can look at our tips and tricks videos for some more on that. And same goes for the MPT. You can use quotes there. Use quick cites on the MPT. Okay, another bit about formatting. Your formatting on the MPT specifically, you are going to use some headings. You can use numbering with those headings. You can use bolding. You can use however you want those headings to stand out. And you're going to use headings based on whatever type of document you're doing. So your headings for a brief are going to look a little bit different than your headings for a memo. And so you'll just want to practice the different forms of legal documents and consider what kind of headings and structures they use there. So unfortunately, there aren't like tips that just generally apply to all MPTs, but headings are very valuable generally in MPTs. Also, sorry, just one other thing with formatting. It's very helpful to use a numbering for your different issues. So, use your paragraphing and then have a number for where you state your issue, or if you're doing a crack kind of format, state your conclusion for the next part. If you don't put numbers there, it all kind of just jumbles together and it's not as clear what you're doing. Margaret has a great question. How do you avoid overdoing favorite subjects? What I like to tell people is when you get the questions, very quickly peek at all 6 of the essays, and then flag the ones you think are going to be easiest, the things that are like quote, favorite, and do those first, but give yourself limited time on them so that you don't accidentally eat into and you're forced to not puke everything you know about that subject into that essay. So, and you don't need to be crazy about it. You still want to give yourself sufficient time, but I think something like 25 minutes is a good target. Like, I really know this stuff. I'm not going to be just sitting there spinning my wheels. I'm going to be typing like nonstop pretty much on this one. But if I do it in 25 minutes, that will keep me from doing it in excess to the harm of my other essays that are more difficult. All right. Can you label quickly each of the questions on the MBE first, then do the ones that you score higher on in order by marking in your book? Do all criminal law questions first, then. That's a very interesting strategy. I have never tried anything like that. So suggesting I'm going to do all the criminal law questions first, and then I'll do all the contracts one, then I'll be in the right mindset for that. So I'm basically doing, this is really interesting because when we recommend as people study, we strongly encourage them to use chunking to keep things in the right bucket in their brain. So study subject by subject, right? And so what if you did the exam subject by subject? It certainly would be easier, but how much time is it going to take to do the labeling for you? I think you just have to test that out and see, is that something that actually saves you time, actually makes you more consistent in your answering? Are you scoring better if you use that approach? Are you saving time? Because I could see it potentially taking a long time, maybe not very long at all. It would take a lot of flipping. The people around you might be like, what the heck is that guy doing? Just like, but it could work. I mean, I don't know. I try it out. Really interesting, novel idea. Let me know how that goes, Darlene, if you do try that. Is it true that graders don't like the use of pronouns in ME answers? Uh, I don't think pronouns are categorically forbidden. The problem with pronouns is there's so many parties usually to a question that you can very quickly make it ambiguous who is who. So if you remember that the beefy conclusion example I gave you, I didn't use many pronouns. Like I said the word Bob, 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 and Frank, Frank, Frank. Because you want to make sure it's crystal clear who we're talking about. And if you ever run the risk of confusion, err on the side of just putting in that party's name. So I know pronouns are generally faster to type, but you run the risk of ambiguity, and that's the problem, Candace. Let's see. Just reading through here. So if case law and statute have similar provisions in the MPT, are we to use the two or make a choice between? You'll likely use the two. But as long as the legislature has authority to make the kind of law they're making, right? Statutes are going to trump common law. Generally, that's statutes come about to replace the common law very often, and so if the case law is prior, the newer statute would trump if there is a conflict, if that makes sense. If the statute's older than the case law, then the case law is likely handling some kind of ambiguity or absurdity with the statute, and the case law would have more importance. Thanks, Isaac, for that one. I hope that was helpful. Martha, let's see. For the performance test, are the potential assignments objective memo, persuasive memo? There's more than that. Basically, any type of legal document, but they are generally in that domain. Sometimes it can be just crafting an email. Let's see. But the biggest things with it is being able to identify your purpose. Is my purpose objective or persuasive? And making sure you use the right approach. Yeah, counter arguments. If you're in a crunch, Lindsay, those are something you could skimp on if you're in a time crunch. But counter arguments are the kind of things that can push your grade from like a really good, like a decent score on an essay to getting among the highest scores. The highest scores are the ones that tend to cover those valid counter arguments. But in a crunch, you're not looking for a 6 out of 6 if that's how your graders scale it. You're looking for like a 3 or a 4. Yeah, we do offer essay grade and feedback services. We just do that through our tutoring program. We could talk offline about that, Natasha. Lindsay says she's chunked page by page on a practice exam, and that was helpful. Thank you, Lindsay, for chiming in. That is so cool. I actually want to personally try that and see how well that works, because that's just, that's brilliant. I don't know where you got that idea, but it's both of you. Good job. On the MEE, does it show which subject the question is based on? It does. Yeah, it makes it pretty clear. And the ME can be on multiple subjects. And Martha, I will clarify what chunked means. Great question. So you can have multiple subjects on the MEE. The ones that you see typically paired together will be things like criminal law and evidence, right? Those often go hand in hand. Constitutional law and criminal law can have overlap. Property, secured transactions, potentially conflict of laws, family law, that's a pretty common one. Agency and torts, if we're thinking respondeat superior type situation, agency can be helpful. Was there an actual or apparent agency for that third-party liability, and then agency and business associations, that comes up a lot too. Let's see. Going to Martha's question of what do we mean by chunked, right? So when you study and potentially when you do practice questions, uh, like practice big questions, generally when you do practice questions, they're chunked. Like if they're short quizzes and things, whoever your test prep, they'll have you, here's your contracts questions, here's Civ Pro questions, yada, yada, and then you'll get like your big exams. But so chunk just means it's subject by subject. And so the approach that's being suggested by some is to go through and on exam day, just flag. I mean, I don't know if you write criminal law or what, or maybe just put a triangle or some kind of symbol for a specific subject, but you go through and you go, where are all the criminal law questions? Boom, 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 boom. Okay, I found them all. And then I'm going to do all those together in a group, just like I practiced together. And then I'm going to go, okay, now I'm doing contracts questions. What are all my contracts? And I'm going to do all my contracts questions. So it takes time to go through to flag and identify, but at least who was it that says Lindsay said it was helpful to go through, and so maybe save time, maybe made her more successful. Hopefully that helps, Martha. So just subject by subject. That's what we mean by chunking. His failure to separate a sub-issue from a major issue detrimental. Sometimes I often don't see a sub-issue until I recognize I wrote about it and explain the conclusion to a major issue. However, when graders grade my essays, they harp on separating the issues. Yeah, generally speaking, you want to separate the issues as much as you can. It's better to hit the issue than to not hit it at all, Amber. I mean, if that's how you realize it and you don't have time to break it out, it's better than nothing. But yeah, issues, one of the best ways to upgrade issues is to break them into sub-issues. So your question has one issue that might break into like 2 or 3 sub-issues and make it very easy for the grader to know that you hit the points. Okay, Lindsay tells us why she's such a genius on the chunking idea. She said she wanted to put off a property question for as long as possible, so she wanted to do everything else first. Great. Okay, I'm gonna hop back in to my presentation. Thanks for all those great questions. We're almost out of time, and we won't cover a ton more, but I hope this will be helpful. These are tips that don't have to do with the actual exam itself and its subject matter, right, and all the practice you're doing, but they are great considerations. And if you haven't thought about them yet, I strongly encourage them. So one, where are you going to sleep? If you have to drive a while to get to the exam, you have to fight traffic. If, rush hour, all that stuff is going to be a stress or potentially keep you from taking the exam, then consider renting a motel or hotel room that's close and will take away all that anxiety if you can, or if you got family nearby or friends or whatever. I stayed with a cousin who was like just 5 minutes from the testing place instead of driving an hour. Consider what you're going to eat the night before for breakfast and also for lunch. Of all of those, I think the most important is what you're going to do for lunch. Strongly recommend, having some kind of sack lunch, maybe have a cooler in your car with the food you're going to eat so you don't have to go to a restaurant and be stressed about getting back in time. It will free up a lot of time for you to go on a walk or do something physical because you've been sitting a lot and you want to get your blood pumping to help you push through the afternoon session. You don't want to be one of those folks that get a lunch coma, which is very common, about 2:30, 3:30, 3 o'clock, people start fading out and nodding off if depending on what they ate for lunch and what they did during that time. And so if you find yourself at risk for that kind of thing, keep track of what makes you feel really good when you eat. It's going to be something that doesn't cause bowel issues potentially for you. It's going to be something that carries you through. You don't have a big like sugar crash or anything like that. So just think through what do I feel really good after eating? I enjoy eating. Plan that in advance. May seem like a small thing. I actually think it's a significant thing. for the afternoon sessions. Is your computer solid? The last thing you want is your computer crashing an exam. Well, it's not the last thing. I mean, there's a lot of worse things, I guess, that could happen than having to use a blue book or, write by hand. If getting up in the morning is a stressor for you, consider having redundant alarms. Set a phone alarm, maybe have an old alarm, maybe have somebody call you. But your goal is to just eliminate as much anxiety as possible surrounding the mechanics and logistics of the exam. So those are 4 biggies. Of those 4, computer, that's a huge one, especially if you type really fast, but you have slow and sloppy penmanship like I do. What you'll eat, eliminate the possibility of lunch coma, have something that will carry you through those afternoons. Just make note, maybe you don't really know, but over the next 5 weeks, just think of what you're eating. And if you're like, wow, it's like 3:30 and I'm still feeling good today, what did I eat for lunch? So, and then the sleeping thing, the redundant alarm is more of a smaller issue in my mind. But if you do have a lot of anxiety and that helps, go for it. All right, there's a bunch of other tips we could go into. If you've looked at our tips and tricks videos, we cover them. There's so much we could cover. We just hit a few. So let's hop back in. We got 3 minutes left. We'll hop back into the chat and just see what we've got there. If we have any more additional questions. Okay. I'll just wait a minute to see if anybody has anything. I really appreciate you taking the time to come. We had about 100 people attend today, which is awesome. I hope this was helpful. Obviously, every test taker is different, right? We all have unique challenges and things like that. So I'm not trying to be pushy about any of these tips that I gave you. Just consider my tips just like anybody else's tips with a grain of salt, right? But hopefully you've got some new ideas there. And stay in touch. If you need help, shoot me an email. We could look into tutoring. If you want to look into Crushendo stuff or have Crushendo specific questions, shoot me an email about that. If you've never tried Crushendo at all, we can get you access to a free outline, just lifetime access, and then you can just try it and just have it. I know most of you probably, hopefully have a bar prep program right now. So anyway, you may not want to use all of Crushendo at this point, but there might be a subject or two that you're struggling with where having the audio could be helpful or having more practice questions. So, I will email you, Chris, and everybody else, the link to this video once we're done. I might just throw it up on our YouTube channel too. So that's a good place to go and subscribe if you haven't. Tips on memorization would be great. Chunking, we mentioned that. That's very helpful. Drilling, flashcards, all of those kind of things. People recommend, and I think there is some scientific basis to it, studying before bed. I like to do gentle review before bed just to have those things digesting as I sleep. When I used audio, I tried to go and do different things for different subjects. That's just a further aid in chunking. That might sound silly, but it seemed to help me. So for example, with business associations, I'd go golfing. For another subject, I go hiking. For another one, I just go, hit baseballs. Let's see. Questions about scrap paper. Carla, you'll have to check with your jurisdiction, but generally speaking, you're going to have some kind of paper that you can write on or be able to do that. And I totally get what you mean about diagramming certain types of questions. Trust, there's a lot of issues there that I would certainly diagram when you're trying to figure out who gets how much of what share based on which distribution method, and wrap property questions, row against perpetuities. Carla, that could be a good one too. Preston, I'm happy to send out the PowerPoint separate from the audio as well. All right, thanks, Carla. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all the thank yous there. I really appreciate that. This is a lot of fun for me. I love what I do, even though the bar exam is kind of a crazy thing. By the way, I'm just going to mention, this is an interesting thing. If you haven't heard, the bar exam is going to change in, I think, a very positive way. The next gen bar exam is coming in 2026, and it's going to be more competence and skill-based, more performance testing, and a little less memorization. And you'd think a company that focuses on memorization would be bothered by that. But I honestly think, that's the way we should go. We live in a world with the internet where, everything's at our fingertips. The fact that we can memorize things should not be as important as our skills and competence that will actually translate to attorney work. There'll still be a little bit of memorization component, but there are good things happening that way. Not saying wait till 2026 to take the exam, but if you end up having to go that route, then you can look forward to that like we are. So, okay. That's how it's done in the UK. Yep, well, I guess we're following the UK in that one. Yeah, they're changing. Yeah, it's crazy. I bet it will be a change that will last for a decade or two. It's kind of a rebrand by the NCBE, in addition to just some fundamental changes to it. And I think they're hoping it will help other states pick it up, because if it's less about the law, then there's less challenges with like state-specific law, right? It being different from the general rules. Obviously, the NCBE is doing great with adoption. We're pushing 40 states already. We're getting up there, but yeah, that's just for the UBE, Martha. So that's going to become the next gen bar exam. And yeah, there are people that do push abolishing the bar exam altogether. And I don't know. I mean, there's pros and cons with it. Obviously, like having a company like I do, I tend to look at the pros more, right? Just like transferability, ways to look at competence beyond schools, because there's so many different factors with schools, and how easy it could be to pass or graduate from a law school. And that can be different from, what you do in the bar exam, but not everybody's a good test taker. So it's bar exam stinks for them. It's just not cool. And you don't have to be a good test taker to be a great attorney. So I totally get that too, Shri. When should you expect to receive the presentation slides? That should be pretty short. I'll do it right after I get off this. The video may be just a little while longer, for it to process and things. But wow, thanks. People, we're 2 minutes over. We still got 80 people here. I'll hang out for just another few minutes if there's any burning questions. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Be tough, be strong, push through this. It's a marathon studying for the bar. You can do it, but be diligent and consistent. Just know the time you spend speculating about whether or not you're going to pass or fail is just wasted time. Just if you get anxious about that, just do more practice questions to fill that time and push away the anxiety by being productive. And just know the harder you push, the more diligent you are now, the less likelihood you'll have to do this again. It will definitely be worth it in the long run. So, all right. Thanks, Adrian. Just gonna scroll up and see if I missed any questions. If anybody has a question that I missed from earlier. Oh yeah, Kashina, the PowerPoint said before bed under memorization. That was just referring to the general review. There's been some studies about the effectiveness of that. You kind of digest. You might even have dreams about the law as you sleep. But I wouldn't do anything that would stress you out before bed. Thanks, Sri, for that confidence. Yeah, I mean, we'll adapt. We'll help law students. We're working on paralegal stuff. If they do get rid of the bar exam, we'll survive. We got some other stuff going. They're looking at abolishing potentially the LSAT requirement too. That stinks for the LSAC. I mean, that's crazy. 5-hour tutoring, how does that work? Well, so currently I still have a little bit of availability to take a few more folks. So if you bought that, you'd get 5 hours with me, and you'd be able to schedule it out in hour chunks when you would want to do that, just through like my Calendly link, Darlene. And there's 3 main things we usually do. Well, 4 main things we usually do. It just depends on what the person wants to focus on. So just general like strategy, planning, scheduling, making sure we're getting the right kind of work in and the right amount of work in, and we're just using time as effectively as possible. Essay review, working on writing, that tends to be a big focus for most people that I tutor. going through MBE questions together and talking through principles, going through outlines together, talking through legal principles. Those are other things that we could do. It just really depends, Darlene, on what you'd be interested in. How long should an MEE answer be? Christopher, great question. Unfortunately, there is no set answer. Like if you look through NCBE point sheets, some of them are very small compared to others. Some of them are quite a bit longer. You just, you want to hit all the critical points that you can think of. You don't want to, brain blast everything in the solar system. Like I mentioned, do like a quick flex and focus. But anything that's worth focusing on, right? You want to hit those things and hit those things sufficiently, ideally using like an IRAC, a crack, or a UROC structure for it. But I would say like typing speed can be a big thing to work on regardless of the length of the essays, because that will save you time. And it will give you the possibility for those longer answers when there are more critical things to cover. And so if your typing speed is not like faster than 50 words per minute, it may be worth doing some typing practice programs. We have a blog post about it that links to like some free resources that you could do, 10, 15 minutes a day to try to get the right techniques in typing. Because if you could get up to like 70, 80 words per minute, that would be awesome. If you're under 40 words per minute, I mean, that's basically a handicap for you. Like that's going to hold you back. So. Alrighty, I'm going to check out now. Thank you so much. It's been great. See y'all later, maybe. I don't know. I might do one more of these in July, and I'm not sure exactly what I'll cover in that, but I'll try not to make it too redundant with what I covered today if I do. And so look for emails on that. Invite your friends if you think this was helpful. God bless you, and good luck.
Crushенdo's revolutionizing legal education with hundreds of mnemonics and illustrations, thousands of practice questions, affordable pricing, lifetime access, whiteboard videos, plus audio outlines and audio flashcards. Master the law faster and with more freedom than ever before with Crushendo. You should definitely check out crushendo.com today.